red, white, and blue. Thank you. Thank
Good evening and welcome to Your Idaho, produced by the Gem State Patriot, an electronic newsletter. My name is Bob Nugabar. My guests for the night are Valerie Candelaria from Project 912, Stephanie Zimmerman from Idahoans for Local Education, and John Einen, a candidate for Superintendent of Public Education. Our topic this evening will be Common Core, Facts and Figures. I see you brought a couple of things here.
Yes, we did.
We intend to get through all of this tonight?
Sure. Actually, it's just to illustrate the expanse of the information that we've covered in our research of this topic.
This is where all of our misinformation comes from.
Right.
This is our documented misinformation.
So, Valerie, do you keep this all at home, or do you have a storage unit for it?
No, it's at home. I have more. This is just part
I
of
see.
it.
So Stephanie has another bunch too? So.
Right. We all
Okay.
have, and there's plenty more electronically that we didn't print.
I can see you've been very busy.
Yes.
In order to cover some of the introductory comments that we missed at the opening during our previous broadcast, can you give the viewers a quick overview of what Common Core standards are and how we came to have them in Idaho?
Common Core is a set of standards, or what children should know at certain ages for math and English language arts. Back in 2009, there was the stimulus bill, which was, $100 billion? And in that, there was $53 billion set aside for education. The first thing they did is they gave a grant called the State Fiscal Stabilization Fund. And when that came out, there were 4 things that each state had to agree to do in order to receive the money. There was adopting common standards and assessments, equitable teacher distribution. I'm going to forget the other two now.
Well, I'm looking at my notes. The enhanced data systems and the turning around of low performance schools.
So those 4 things. So we applied for this grant. We applied for $491 million, and we got $247 million. And then a little later came out Race to the Top, which was a competitive grant. So we've paid all this tax money in. Now we get to compete to have it back. And once again, in Race to the Top, there were those 4 different pillars. Equitable teacher distribution, the data systems, standards and assessments, and turning around low-performing schools. In order to even apply for Race to the Top, you had to have the State Fiscal Stabilization Fund grant approved. So while we didn't win money in Race to the Top, we didn't get enough points to compete for that money. We did get the money from the State Fiscal Stabilization Fund, and that's how it was ushered in. And then in order to get a waiver from the most harsh portions of No Child Left Behind, we also had to once again agree to those 4 things. And that's how we ended up with Common Core in our state.
Just one quick question. You said you had to pay in $291 million, is that correct?
We applied for $491 million, and we received a grant for $247 million.
Okay, that was a grant from the government.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And of that, you wound up with?
The $247
the whole. Okay, thank you. Valerie, do you have anything further to add to some of this?
Well, I think that the same 4 assurances appear in every one of those phases of implement or phases of commitment, I guess. It really dates back to the 2007 America Competes Act, which was an effort on the behalf of the federal programs to promote physical sciences, engineering, and math. It really is kind of the origin of the push for STEM. But the same 4 assurances were there. So the State Fiscal Stabilization Fund, the Race to the Top application, and our waiver application, all of those had the same 4 assurances. So we've committed just through the act of applying for this money. And it really is all following the same mantra of the United States falling behind in their global competitiveness. It's the same thing, same drum they've been beating for decades.
How does this line up with No Child Left Behind, which we all know was a failure?
It's No Child Left Behind on steroids. That's what it's been called, or in drag. It's the same thing. It's just been repackaged and sold to us in another manner. So
it is more the same.
More the same.
So is the government selling us some more nothing? that we can pay for with something that we don't have?
Well, we're paying for it with data, too.
I see.
It's more experimenting with our children.
Right.
So this is one big government experiment, and we're paying for it regardless.
And our kids are being used as guinea pigs.
That's right. If I'm not mistaken, when those assurances were made, we didn't even have a draft of the standards.
Correct.
Correct. No, we didn't. That was something that came after we agreed to adopt those.
And we did talk about those standards and the group that put them together, and about how 5 or 6 of those people who put it together actually would not sign off on them.
Right. We talked about the originators or the writers of the standards being Achieve Inc. primarily, David Coleman at the head of that. But the five number that you're referring to are members of the validation committee. There were 30 members on the validation committee.
That's
and there
right.
were 5 that were actually dissented. They would not sign off on the standards. And I think that what we've referred to before is that in that whole process, Sandra Stotsky was on the validation committee, and so was James Milgram. Both of them explained that just despite the massive amounts of feedback that were received, even at the draft, even before they were finalized, only about 10,000 comments I think there were, and only 3 pages were shown in the final report, and there was no representation, no record of the 5 dissenting opinions.
I have a hard time figuring how to take 10,000 comments and boil them down into 3 pages.
Little tiny
It's
print.
magic.
I'm sure you do too. Yeah, so it's government magic.
You know, Bob, that validation issue is really important
Right.
to the fundamental principles of research methodology, in the fact that there were 5 out of 30 who contest the validity of these standards shows a real bias, and there's been no real opportunity for strong scholarly peer review subsequently to those validations. We also don't have any confidence level assigned through the validation process to those standards.
So basically, this is something that's been untested, hasn't been truly validated, but we're still going to use it on our schools.
That's right.
Great. This is terrific. You know, your critics continue to say that Common Core opponents like you are spreading misinformation to parents across the state, and in fact across the nation. How would you defend your position in response to that criticism?
Well, we brought props to start with.
I see, and I'm not taking them home with me.
No. But you want to talk about them a little bit?
Just that when you start actually reading the documents, you can start with the State Fiscal Stabilization Fund and then our Race to the Top application and then our ESEA waiver. If you start with those basics, you're going to find that everything we've said is documented, and then you start looking at other documents. Like in that pile of documents, there's one called Smart Options. It was put together by Eli Broad Foundation and the Gates Foundation, and it validates everything that we've been saying. There's one here, Blueprint for Reform, from the U.S. Department of Education. You get reading the ancillary documentation, and everything we say is documented, and not by people who are against Common Core, but by people who are for Common Core.
Right, the actual
That's
promoters. These documents come from the Federal Department of Education, they come from the State Department of Education, they come from think tanks.
So I presume we paid to print most of this up too.
Well, sure,
Okay.
sure.
All right, I just want to see where we're going here. Can you help us understand why the issue of student data is of such great concern with Common Core, and haven't we always collected data from students?
You want to start with it?
We always collected data, but it was aggregate data. And it is actually illegal for the federal government to have a national database.
Would you explain aggregate data to our audience so they understand what we're talking about?
Aggregate means it's all lumped together. You cannot pick an individual out and tell their data. They take the class and they throw all the data together. Disaggregate data is individual student level data.
That's right.
And there have been changes to the law that used to protect student data. It's called FERPA, Family Education Rights and Privacy Act. And there have been changes to that so that now they no longer have to ask parental permission, and they no longer have to keep the data aggregate. They can send you student level data. But it's illegal for the federal government to have one national database. So what they did is they went to each state and helped them set up identical databases.
Kind of like the state health exchanges.
Yes.
Yes.
Very much.
Okay.
Like that. They're called the state longitudinal data systems. And really, the descriptors assigned to this in terms of what describes the kind of data that goes into this is a P20W. It was originally set out to be a P20, which stands for pre-kindergarten through doctoral college, or 20 years of education. We got a grant of nearly $6 million in March of '09 to finish that phase of implementation. We got another $3 million in January of 2012 to finish and add in the W to make it a P20W. W meaning workforce, because they intend to track our children from pre-kindergarten through career. They want to know where you went to school, how you did, what you studied, where you worked, did you move, did you go to college, did you change careers? They want to know everything.
So what they want to do is basically put you in a box. This is your box. This is the one you're going to be in, and you're not going to be able to change that very much because they're going to have all this data and information on you. Where does the innovation and where does the creativity come in?
That's not a factor. That's not a factor in this program, really. They say it is.
It's not. This isn't about innovation and creativity and entrepreneurship. This is about building a workforce. This is about making sure that your students, your children, are good little cogs in that wheel that will go to work, show up on time, be able to screw in a bolt, go home, and not complain because they don't know any different.
Kind of like China, where they get them to work for 50 cents an hour to sew Nike sneakers together?
Well, I don't know that they would admit to that. But
I
think
see.
that
Okay.
what they've got going, though, this is more data than we have ever collected before.
I understand
It's not
that.
academic. It's more behavioral and demographic type data. They want to know nicknames and hobbies and bus stops, behavioral issues, disciplinary actions if there were.
This is almost as bad as NSA, with the
Well,
data from a data collection standpoint.
This is, the intent here, I believe, is to create a lifelong profile of an individual.
That's right.
And they're also, they're pressing to make decisions about career tracks, basically, or skill tracks based on the student's academic achievement throughout school. We've heard it, or even seen it written, that this is an effort that's being made in 8th grade now. And one of the pieces of evidence that we came across last year was an ID card that one of our members' students.
I was going to ask you about that. And that's the one from the Labor Department?
Right. It was a career information system, which I understand is a program that's been operated through the Department of Education here for a long time. This is not a new program, but it's never been operated through the Department of Labor before. And this particular card had a Department of Labor logo on it, and when you went to that website, there was a page that talked about career development for elementary and middle school students. So, the data sharing that has to happen in order to make that, to achieve that, is between, we have the Department of Transportation through the DMV attaches Social Security numbers, which are then convey to the Department of Labor so that they can link that all together.
No, hold on a second. These are all private and individual classified material as far as I'm concerned. This belongs to you.
The student identity.
Why are they permitted to take this identification information and compile it
Well, part of their
and
objective.
share it?
Part of their objective is to find out why students are leaving the state after they finish school. Are they going to school here? Are they moving out of the state? How can we keep them here? They want to do research.
So the kids are going to become a bunch of guinea pigs in a laboratory.
That's exactly what they are. And actually, as you look at the assessment that we're now taking, the Smarter Balance Assessment Consortium, they don't hide the fact that what they're doing in these tests is called psychometric data.
What is psychometric data for our audience?
It doesn't measure what you know, it measures your attributes and your skills and your personality traits even. It's used very heavily in the corporate world to see where a person will fit in the corporate structure. You give this to an 8th grader and it comes back, you're good at math. Well, then what do? They funnel you into that system. That you're going to take these math classes. There's no point in you taking AP history because you're not going to go into history. Or you are gifted in history. There's no point in you taking those math classes. It's workforce training. And there is actually, Bill Gates has spent a lot of money in a data system that is going to start tracking where those skills are and where do they need to be across the country. It's cattle. We're going to
Okay, we're talking about our public schools. What about the private schools? What happens in those? Because I've heard several times that they're not teaching the Common Core the way they're teaching it in the public schools. They have not accepted it.
If they don't, I think the other thing is we got a complete turnover of curriculum, available curriculum associated with this Common Core because it's national. I think homeschoolers and private schools are going to be hard pressed to find available content that is not Common Core aligned.
That's correct.
And the other way is that they're realigning the entrance exams for college, both the ACT and the SAT are being realigned to conform with the standards. And so if students, regardless of what school they go to, are not taught using the methodologies of Common Core, they're not going to score very well on their entrance exams. That's really kind of the gotcha of all of this. And I think I want to add one thing of what Stephanie was saying, if you don't mind. We're talking about a pretty Orwellian arrangement here.
Sure.
And I think that it's not like tomorrow, they're going to start out doing all of this tomorrow, but I think this whole is a framework that they've built here that enables them to follow some of the long-term plans that education reform has had. What we have in the culmination of all of this for Common Core is essentially what Mark Tucker was talking about 30 years ago with his Dear Hillary plan, where he liked the German education design of education, where you had everybody is receiving the same exact education. Everybody is going to be entered into a database that's going to be linked with employment. I mean, this is exactly the kind of thing that he was envisioning years ago. And has been involved with the development of Common Core as well.
Well, let's get back to a couple things. First of all is testing, and the second of all is the literature on the curriculum. Now, we've talked about Pierson being the primary publisher for this. I was listening on the radio this morning, and they were actually talking about how it will be so much better if we have one group, one corporation, do all of the literature, because then there'll be consistency, and it will be a lot cheaper.
And digital, so they
I don't
on a dime.
See, I don't understand how it'll be cheaper because they'll have a monopoly on it. They can charge whatever they want for it.
Well, the other thing about the digital lessons as opposed to textbooks is that if you buy a textbook, you can use it for 7 years or whatever the normal lifetime of the textbook is. You pay for it once and you get with the duration of use. With digital lessons, as I understand it, you renew those subscriptions basically on an annual basis.
Correct.
And that over time, you're going to end up probably spending more, especially if you've got monopoly control of the market.
Right.
This is a market development thing, too.
So this was basically going back to the beginnings of it. When you take a look at the people involved, Pierson Company and Bill Gates, these are data people.
Right.
They're literature people, they're data people. They have to get something out of this if they're putting all this money into it. I don't see how anybody puts hundreds of millions of dollars into a program and expects nothing back, and it's just out of the kindness of their heart.
Bill Gates has said that this is developing a common customer base for him.
He has.
Right.
He's come
Okay.
right out and said that. But there's also, and they're building massive database management companies around. There's a big market for data.
Absolutely.
And aside from the curriculum and all of that there's a market for, there's a big market for data. They want to do research. And what better research pool to draw from than 50 million children around the country?
Yeah, and nothing's private anymore. You know, I go onto the internet the other day and I find my name on there. And my God, these guys know when I was born, where I've lived, I mean, who my mom and dad were, you know, how many kids I got, where they live. I never gave them any. It's all a matter of public record. But what drives me nuts is now they want to dig even deeper into the data for our kids. And that I am not for. This has got to change.
Right. I agree. I think the data is probably the scariest part of all of this. There's certainly deficiencies in the standards as well that we've heard about from some of those who know better than us.
Another question here. Don't they know this data in order to determine how well students are meeting the achievement objectives? Isn't that the point of the new tests, that they need the data for that? Or is it just that they want to standardize all tests for everybody?
It's that they want to standardize the tests. Really, if you want to know what a child is learning, you have to have a good relationship with the teacher in the classroom. That teacher's going to know more. And the results from the tests don't come back immediately. They don't come back until later in the fall when it's too late for the teacher to do anything, to change anything to help a student. So this...
Right. The way they have the test, their vision for the way these tests are going to work, there's a lot of performance-based items, a lot of open-ended responses. Those are not immediately scored. Those are hand-scored manually by somebody somewhere. I don't know. Hope it's not India. But anyway, they're hand-scored, and that's the reason for the delay in the feedback. I think that a lot of the computer-based stuff probably would be completed immediately, but not in a timely enough manner to really be of use for instructional purposes.
Right. We haven't addressed cost either, and no one seems to be openly. And the fact of the matter is, we're not going to get any feedback on this pilot test that's taking place this spring because of the cost to the state. But I would also submit that it's because of the negative publicity that they've received in those states that have been doing this for 3 years and already piloted. So, yeah.
And I understand
there's a whole lot at work here.
A lot of those states have been looking at terminating these contracts because of the outrageous cost.
That's right.
Right.
Kentucky in particular, they were the first one. They do what's called PARC, which is equal to our SBAC. But they found that it was so cost prohibitive to score, in particular, the open-ended questions, that they have stopped that. They just cannot afford to do it.
How do they intend to fund this here in Idaho when they can't even find enough money to pay the teachers we currently have?
Tom Luna has responded to should cost about the same as the ISAT. That's his response. And that doesn't even that's not even reasonable considering these manually scored items. One of the things that Zev Warman, who is an assessment consultant, works for a firm called TWF Consulting in Palo Alto, California. What he has said is that your ISAT vendor is perfectly capable of modifying your current test to make it to align it with Common Core. That you don't have to do all this open-ended stuff if you don't want to. But Luna seems to think we can do it for the same cost. I just don't see how it's possible with all the manual scoring that they're proposing.
Well, I'm going to bring up something I brought up the last time. I have a teacher that lives in my neighborhood who said she has to go to a 4-hour class to learn about Common Core. Somebody has to pay for this. So I presume the state's going to pay for this. They're going to do this with every teacher in the state. And John, you're a teacher, so I know.
That's right. We are re-educating a very highly educated workforce to begin with in a methodology of teaching and instruction that they have not given any solid research statistics to show that is going to be efficacious in the long run. So yes, you're right, and most of the professional development that has been done by the Pierson or the Discovery Education representatives who are corporate representatives.
Sure.
It's not coming from our departments of education in our schools of higher institutions, our colleges and universities, where these kind of teacher professional in-services should be coming from.
Well, I mean, as a teacher and as somebody who is going through this process right now, what's your assessment?
Oh, it's frustrating. And I cannot tell you the number of teachers and administrators during those sessions who have come up to me on the slide because they're afraid to speak up in public and said, please, you got to get us out of this. And that's bearing true testimony. I've been in some of these professional development workshops where a teacher would bring up the fact, well, this question is worded so poorly that how can we expect the child to understand what we're asking? And the response of the consultant has been, well, these questions haven't been field tested yet. That's what you're going to do for us in this pilot test. Well, how many millions of dollars have been spent on something that has not even been field tested and we've already signed on to?
Well, I don't find it unusual for the states and the people who run these divisions of the states to do these types of things, because they don't care. It's not their money being spent, it's other people's money being spent. And I don't think they much care about how our children learn. I think they're more concerned with making everybody happy at the top. And that's why we haven't heard a large outcry from the teachers in this state, because most of them, it's mum's the word.
I think many of them feel intimidated to speak up, quite honestly.
We've had some entries in our online survey. We have an anonymous survey online for teachers. We've had some entries there that say they definitely feel inhibited or muffled, basically, that they can't speak up. They feel like their jobs are at risk, or they would be subject to harassment or bullying or whatever you want to call it. So it's not that they don't care, and I think that the other thing we want them to understand is that we're kind of on their side.
I think we covered an awful lot here. At least we've got some of the nitty-gritty. John, I would kind of like to ask you a couple of questions, since you're a candidate for Superintendent of Education. Can you tell us what your qualifications are?
Sure. Bob, I am a successful classroom teacher, and I've been recognized as Teacher of the Year in Idaho County Schools. I spent a decade in the textbook, technology, publishing industry as a senior corporate rep and educational consultant. And I have traveled all over the Pacific Northwest, the Mountain States, and even to Texas, giving professional development and in-service workshops to our teachers. And I stress that because I believe that in this whole process, our teachers have been targeted, embattled, and been made the scapegoat for failing schools. And in reality, most of the teachers that I encountered were professional, compassionate, and dedicated to their children. And it's just not fair to our children or to the teachers to have this high-stakes testing. Not only have I had the experience in the publishing world, but I'm a retired United States Navy commander. So I've had the senior leadership, management, training courses, and practical experience in leading in high-stress situations. So I'm ready to take on this office.
How have you been received around the state?
It's exciting.
I'm sure it is. It's just exciting as any other campaign would be.
I am really enthusiastic by the response that we're getting. Our message is really striking a chord in the hearts of people throughout the state. And I appreciate the fact that many come up after our campaign speeches to share that with us. That's parents, grandparents, and teachers alike.
What's your vision for Idaho schools?
My vision for Idaho schools is to get back to a true liberal arts education for our children, to stress an education in vocational, trade, technology, agriculture, the kind of jobs that are going to keep our children in the state of Idaho. I find it ludicrous that we have now set an objective for 60% of the children to go on to college. They're going to come out with $100,000, $120,000 in indebtedness, and we haven't created the jobs that are going to give them a return on their investment.
I'd like to thank our technicians and the people who came here tonight. I really appreciate you spending the time with us here and try to enlighten the people. I want to thank TVC-TV for making the broadcast possible. They're a nonprofit organization. If you wish to donate, you can do so by going to their website at www.tvctvonline.org. Good night, Idaho.